Previously on the reader's history of Cloak and Dagger, they were introduced in Spider-Man, had a miniseries that explained their origins and turned them into less murdery vigilantes, and they had a few other guest spots. So that leads us to the next guest starring role in The New Mutants. Okay, that's not exactly true for the first one. New Mutants number 22 had a lot of things, but Cloak and Dagger only technically appear as the Black Baron and the Sparkling Sorceress, who Rain, or Wolfsbane if you remember, tears apart in her dreams. I'm not entirely sure why they were the focus of that, other than the team-up issue from a few issues back in our time, or just to heavily foreshadow the next storyline, but let's find out together. Just for expediency's sake, the relevant plot points before Cloak and Dagger actually appear, which may also be a rant later, is that Roberto da Casto, Sunspot, has been losing control of himself and his powers, becoming more monstrous similar to what he looked like in Marvel Team-Up Annual number 6. Rain, according to this issue anyways, seems to be suffering from the same thing, though with blackouts. Except she also has Tandy's necklace, I guess, which leads them to the Roosevelt Hotel, where apparently the dream that Rain had last issue was actually reality, and she massacred Cloak and Dagger. Don't worry, Tandy and Tyrone are okay and at a hospital due to the shock, not the mutilation, since they did heal up afterwards. Except when we talk to the stuttering Tyrone and Tandy, they no longer have their powers. Wait, why are they asking who they are? Danny and Sam are the two mutants they interacted with in that issue. Oh, sweet Christmas, it's the yes I remember exposition amnesia. That's when, oh hey, remember when ... type exposition is given. Though I'm not sure Chris Claremont actually read that issue, cause yeah, it's a little shaky. Anyways, Danny and Sam are saying that Roberto and Rain now actually have Cloak and Dagger's powers. Though, again, we haven't actually seen Rain use any of Dagger's powers, acting instead more like the feral wolf form when she was injected, which had nothing to do with Dagger. And Roberto's actually makes sense since his darkness power are also based on the light, though if I recall it's mainly solar power that works for him. Either way, Ty says that they're happy now that they don't have their powers and decide not to help. All in all, they have about 2 pages in this book. Okay, how about the next one, New Mutants number 24? Well, we actually see Rain using her light powers to stave off Roberto's darkness. And yeah, Rain's hair grows out when she uses the power because why not? And when everyone comes to try and help, Bobby poofs them off to somewhere. Okay, so let's actually see what Ty and Tandy are up to. They left the hospital running away from those damn dirty muties. Basically, this is just a way to give them a we can't do anything now that we don't have our powers moment when it comes to this drug dealer. Which then leads to Ty and Tandy arguing about that, with Ty eventually saying that he pretty much just said everything before to make Tandy like him. And then we have the guilt trip of, but Ty, can you really be okay with the cloak curse being on someone else? Of course, that does mean that the issue ends after Ilyana Rasputin fails to do some magics to get rid of the light and the dark from Rain and Roberto respectively, Ty and Tandy coming to help because, of course, it does. Finally, we reach the end of this odd derailment with New Mutants number 25, where we learn that Tandy's uncle, Uncle Michael Bowen, is actually a priest and was the priest that Roberto went to after he poofed last issue. This just feels random. And then Ty yells and berates Tandy in front of everyone, because apparently he also has an impulse control problem and is in fact a total jerk. But of course, this is because he's afraid, and he hates but loves being Cloak because he's a somebody with those powers. It's here that I'm going to say that I don't think Claremont ever read any of the previous Cloak and Dagger books. I understand Ty maybe being afraid and angry without the Dark Dimension. I truly do. I think we've all at one point overreacted way more than we should have in any situation. But Ty was a somebody in his life with basketball and his grades. At least to the point we've seen in the past, he didn't feel small. It was Tandy whose life felt so screwy, with a disinterested mother losing her V card to a douche and being overly emotional that she never felt like someone in her life, so she left. And yet, he even brings up the reason he ran away. Billy's death. Yes, you couldn't use your words, but you tried. It was your speech impediment that, you know what, I don't want to rant. Anyone who's read this, let me know if I'm just being a fanboy for not clicking with Claremont's overly emoted Ty, or if it is as bad as I'm saying. Moving on, after an overly written monologue from Professor Charles Xavier, Ty gets his confidence to do whatever. Then, after an overly drawn, sort of fight scene in the Mindscape, Cloak and Dagger are back to being Cloak and Dagger. There's even an epilogue where they deal with the dude they couldn't deal with when they didn't have powers. So literally that whole storyline amounted to making Ty look just weak as sin without Cloak and kind of a dick. I've justified before that I couldn't be so annoyed with previous things because they weren't the focus. But here, there were points where it was specifically focusing not just on what not just on what Ty and Tandy were doing, but spending pages on Ty's mentality with and without Cloak. Hopefully it either settles better in later issues or gets forgotten entirely. So their next title hop is to the preteen hero group, the Power Pack. If you don't know who the Power Pack are, I understand. They're 4 siblings from the Powers family who are given special powers by an anthropomorphic horse species to save the world. Seems like the perfect partnering with a couple of drug-powered runaways, doesn't it? Power Pack number 6 actually does something fun. Okay, at least I think it's fun. Cloak and Dagger only appear when talking to Spider-Man about the same people that injected them with drugs, creating a monster army. Yes, continuity drop, but whatever. But the only monster flying around is Dragon Man, which also means that there's a strange link between my OG Guardians of the Galaxy reader's history and this. Huh. But it isn't until the next issue that Cloak and Dagger really appear, where, after the Power Pack goes through some shenanigans with Dragon Man, they show up to help the Power Pack try and save their sister. But when a giant horde of monsters attack, Cloak and Dagger are actually powerless to hurt them. They're robots, so they have no life force to either drain or just impact at all. That leads to the rest of the Power Pack being kidnapped, with Cloak and Dagger now being forced to work for the Crook, or else the Power Pack dies. The story concludes in Power Pack number 8, where there's a bit of a fight where Dagger then gets caught, so Cloak does follow what D'Angelo, the main baddie, has to say. How can our heroes get out of this? Actually, it's fairly simple. Dr. Gilbert, the guy who created Dragon Man, apparently is able to make a sophisticated headpiece to block D'Angelo's control over Dragon Man while they're in their basement prison. They escape and go to save the day. During the fight, though, D'Angelo falls to his death. After some pleas from the Power Pack, Dagger brings him back to life. Okay. Cloak in turn decides to try and absorb all the bad guys. After a now standard, "we aren't monsters" talk, Cloak vomits them back up. With the case wrapped up and a reminder they do have friends out there, Cloak and Dagger leave. I actually kind of liked this, even if it was kind of regressive for the characters. Yes, I even checked the publishing dates to make sure I wasn't skipping around. It hammers in the same thing we've seen with the characters over and over again. Oh, we're monsters. Oh, we're monsters. They don't deserve to live, and stuff like that. But I think the reason it works here is because the Powers kids aren't letting them get away with that sort of talk. Every melodramatic rant about how they're bad people is met with the kids going, "No, you're not, shut up," and basically calling them out for their self-hatred. I think this is a good example of how a continuity hiccup, like having D'Angelo tie into their past, or the eating of thugs by Cloak, can be forgiven when you get to see how they interact with younger, more innocent characters. And it is a theme that will continue to pop up in their future appearances. I am going to be skipping over Secret Wars number 3, which is basically just them being part of the world when the Beyonder makes it humble. Okay, Iron Sheik joke? You gotta definitely tell me whether or not the kids will understand who even Iron Sheik is. But that doesn't really factor into the next big step in Cloak and Dagger's career. Another comic, this time an ongoing. And yeah, Mantlo is the writer, with Leonardi and Austin on art, just like in the Marvel Fanfare number 9 from the end of the last video, and my personal favorite art team for Cloak and Dagger, though Mahmoud Asrar on covers right now for the 2018 Cloak and Dagger book is really good. We begin in pre-Giuliani Times Square, with Cloak and Dagger on the hunt, and in a bunny booth a man, with a wife and family at home, slinks into the basement of some back alley adult store. Oh yeah, there's some definitely illegal bunny booths in back, and he's ready to tug one out, but when the screen comes up, Cloak and Dagger are there to save the underage teen runaway girl. Could be worse, you should see who's in the booth next to him. Of course, there's an action beat, but the real point of this scene is simply this, pointing out that the average Joe, the regular guy, is the reason for the dark underbelly to flourish. And I do actually like that it's not necessarily an anti-porn stance, which sometimes can come through in these stories, but they're all about the missing runaway ring and the peep shows they've been being used for. So it's them taking on human trafficking, which is something we could all get behind. But there's more afoot, as the head honcho calls in the protection he's been paying for. However, the desk sergeant that he's been paying off only gives them the heads up about vice raids, not about superheroes. But Detective O'Reilly isn't on the take, and she relieves the desk sergeant of duty while she straps up to head over to Cloak and Dagger's peep show extravaganza. After Dagger has an angry meltdown about forced sex work, O'Reilly and some blue shirts show up. Cloak gives the main bad guy to the cops before they teleport away, with an "oh snap" line about how they brought these people to justice, not the law. Of course, we also get a "you'll get yours" from one of the porn brokers to Detective O'Reilly. And of course, O'Reilly brings up to him that she would have probably been much worse than Cloak and Dagger if she had been on call first. Man, everyone seems to be extra grumpy this issue. So where did Cloak and Dagger poof off to? Their own sanctuary at the Holy Ghost Church, where we at least learn Father Francis's full name is Francis Xavier Delgado, though show watchers would have probably already known his name. And we get another scene of Father Delgado being a jerk to Cloak, saying that he's let them stay there so that one day he can break Cloak's hold over Dagger. Dagger denies that there's a hold, and then we get their origins again. However, after even more arguing, Father Delgado gives Tandy a note with an address to meet her mother on Long Island. Cloak is straight up pissed about this. How dare the priest try to take away what he loves most in the... Okay, so apparently Cloak's actually gone legit full Black Snake moan here. He's also saying that their powers are the best things ever and gives them the right to... Yeah, okay, fine. Cloak's just an anti-villain now. A bad guy who just happens to be on the side of the air-quote good strictly by the people he's targeting. Or rather would if he wasn't going to take his anger out on the priest by going after his parishioners. But Father Delgado stands between Cloak and the innocents. He starts being absorbed into the cloak, but Dagger takes his hand and both of them are drawn into the evils of the cloak. Father Delgado sees the personal hell inside that cloak is, oddly, a fantastic metal album cover. I don't think I've brought up that the dark dimension of Cloak's cloak basically acts as a personal hell for whoever enters it, but now you know. Do-do-do-do. The father is gonzo when he comes out of the cloak, seeing that hellscape, and only Dagger can race to save those in the church. Cloak confronts an old homeless woman, trying to get her to confess that she's actually a sinner. Here is where we can really see that Cloak is being utterly consumed by the darkness, twisting his ideals so that it would consume them all. And the darkness is winning. His cloak opens, enveloping everyone in the church, but Tandy hops in after them. She manages to save them from something truly dark stalking within the darkness, and even gets everyone out of Cloak. But this was the last straw for Dagger. Their mission is making them monsters, and she's leaving. Okay, since that issue ends, let me be clear. I understand what Mantlo is trying to do here. The overall story is that Cloak is being consumed more and more by the darkness, so he's getting harder and more evil, while Tandy is struggling to be with her friend and be in this abusive relationship. My issue is that even if we take out everything not written by Mantlo since the ending of the first miniseries, there's such a retread and almost a 90-degree angle in direction that it just feels weird. But I will say that it could easily be the binge read that has it feeling so weird. I assume it was Mantlo wanting to develop this aspect more after the miniseries, because I did bring up in that video that they did have an abusive relationship. Let's just digress to the next issue, which begins with Tandy's stepdad, Philip Carlisle, on his way to New York City to try and be there for Tandy and her mom, Melissa's meetup. With the main plot though, Father Delgado is driving Tandy, dressed in her richest, girliest civvies, and Cloak, who's still very much Cloak, stuffed into the back seat. How did that conversation go after the last issue? I'm getting out of here. Come on, Cloak, it'll be fun. And then during the ride, she actually says, "Can't you just be glad for me?" As though there wasn't a huge example of why Cloak needs Dagger around to make him not a true villain, literally at the very end of the last issue. And adding to the fact that they're going to the North Shore of Long Island, the Great Gatsby locale, and Tandy rubbing it in how she may have grown up a rich girl, she's never craved money like her mom always did. And I'm just going to say that while not all people crave money, the people who have had money don't understand why people want it, because they've never had to have that struggle. Sorry, before this gets even more political, on the way to the bougie neighborhood, a boat catches fire in the harbor. And yes, there's actually a 4 or 5 page little meanwhile story that shows the drunk rich teens that burned down the boat cause screw our parents, man. Truly, truly riveting. Cloak kidnaps Tandy to deal with the little firebugs, which gets Tandy angry at Cloak, but even more so at the parents that the kids were trying to gain the attention of. Tandy, filled with righteous fury, storms into the house, but the house is filled with drunk, high, horny, rich people who feel they can do anything they want. But suddenly, her mother calls her over. That's right, her mother is actually at this unhealthy party, and she decides to just start ripping into her daughter in front of all these people. But Tandy, having reached her breaking point, unleashes a mighty tantrum of light. See, I wouldn't call it a tantrum, but she does so while screaming, "Pay attention to me!" CLOAK comes in and Dagger gives in to what he's been saying, that she has no one else other than CLOAK to love her. And here's a real nail in the coffin for this story. CLOAK's evil I won laugh. My problem with this scene is twofold. Literally, in the last miniseries, you had Dagger explaining that her body overheats and only CLOAK's cloak drains enough of it for it to be bearable for her, similar to how CLOAK's power works. And you also had CLOAK literally running away from Dagger the second he felt he was losing the battle with the darkness. And here's the reason why I'm saying this can't be a darkness has taken hold story, because the narration says it too, talking about how he may not realize he betrayed his true love just to be selfish. I get that Mantlo is pushing an abusive relationship angle, but this is just really sort of heavy-handed, no, he must truly be an evil prick, or else it's not really abuse. After CLOAK and Dagger leave, that's when Tandy's stepdad comes in, and Father Delgado is all doom and gloom, doom and gloom. And over at the precinct, Detective O'Reilly assigns herself to clean up the station of the dirty cops. I'm sure Internal Affairs would have a say, but hey, she's a loose cannon, but she gets results. And other angry lieutenant quotes. Continuing this tale in CLOAK and Dagger number 3 with, hey, Spider-Man's in this issue according to the cover, so hopefully we get a break with whatever the hell's going on with CLOAK's new personality. It opens with CLOAK and Dagger attacking the top drug runners, more brutal than ever, but still letting them live so the cops can find them. But Detective O'Reilly has also grown very cold towards our vigilante duo. Granted, they've also basically become Crazy Punisher from when he was shooting at litterers, and maybe that's what Mantlo was going for here. Anywho, another interesting point is that CLOAK and Dagger are still holding up inside the Holy Ghost Church, which does surprise me, but maybe it's just because that's the only place that Candy can rest in peace. Across the street, or at least somewhere close, Peter Parker volunteers at a homeless shelter. This wouldn't be out of the ordinary for a nice guy like Petey, except at one of the encounter meetings. That's generally how they get parents of runaways to open up and potentially be able to find their kid. Phil Carlisle is there talking about and looking for Tandy. Naturally, Peter runs off to change into his tidy spideys, and he heads over to the Holy Ghost Church to try and find her. But CLOAK is standing in his way, basically blocking him from telling Dagger anything, but then she comes out to go, I can't go home. I'm not who I was then, and I'm not even human now. To which Spidey literally has my favorite moment in this whole arc, where he tells them both that they're not special when it comes to having powers or even having problems in their lives, but they need to make it so that their powers aren't the cause of their problems. Granted, it is ironic coming from Spider-Man, you know, the face of, my powers are a life problem. But directly following that scene is one of the weirdest moments, because Spider-Man then takes Dagger's hand and they dance like they're at the prom, leading to her unmasking him and them kissing. Man, MJ is gonna be pissed. CLOAK is opposed to this naturally, so he decides to swallow Spider-Man into his darkness. But with Dagger still holding his hand, Spidey doesn't see his doom. Rather, he sees the dark soul of the city. A moment that I think could have worked so much better if this was a Spidey book, because he comes out of the other end with a new perspective that could have really carried over. CLOAK and Dagger then poof off, and Spidey swings away, again having more to think about. Though hey, plus side, it's not him left in the dark for once. Later on, Detective O'Reilly and a team are gearing up for a super big narcotics bust. Yes, just like scientists in media being every field of science, detectives are every field of law enforcement. It's at this time that Father Delgado and Phil Carlisle come in to try and talk to O'Reilly about coming along on their bus in case Dagger is there. Obviously, O'Reilly says no since it's a police action, duh, but that doesn't mean that they won't follow them anyways. Oh, I'm sure this is just gonna end swell. At the drug bust, first Spidey arrives and stops the immediate threat. But CLOAK and Dagger were there waiting for that boat to meet up with another boat in the harbor to find out who the drug runners behind this all was. Which means it's begrudging team-up time. And they get the info they need at the end, right as Los Policías show up. CLOAK and Dagger poof off and Spidey swings away. And we see O'Reilly's rage at the superhero community really starting to boil over, while Father Delgado and Phil now truly see the world that CLOAK and Dagger operates in. But that ends the issue. The final issue we'll be covering in this episode is issue 4, a tie-in to Secret Wars number 2, which will be getting its own reader's history since I do already have most of the issues. Short of it, the Beyonder from the first Secret Wars decided to come to Earth and hijinks ensued. This issue begins with Father Delgado finally discovering that Cloak and Dagger have been staying in his church without his knowledge. But Cloak counters because last issue we discovered that the drugs they were going to intercept were being dealt through a religious organization, so clearly it might be linked to Father Delgado. But as always, a pissing contest between Cloak and Father Delgado goes down, with Tandy standing firmly in between them and saying that they need to stop acting like children. The father does at least yield to get Dagger food and let them rest, so something at least comes from that argument this time. Elsewhere, Detective O'Reilly is back at the docks checking out the drug shipment, but the crates are all empty. But Curly, the scumbag who informed on everyone, decides to say that he don't know nothing, and the religious icons, as they were listed on the manifest, were trucked away by the boys in blue. O'Reilly snaps at him, pistol whipping him in anger at someone else bringing up crooked cops. This does lead to her getting the information she wants, and they're going to hit all these warehouses before daybreak to avoid any cops spilling the beans. But it's time for the Secret Wars tie-in bit, as the Beyonder walks through the squalor of the ghetto. A US definition, not the original, obviously. And he's actively thinking about how he could make this place better with his infinite power. While walking down the street, muttering to himself, Cloak and Dagger watch him while talking about the drug ship. But this is the Marvel Universe, so the Beyonder decides to follow the advice of a few stoop-dwelling hoods, to come inside and find happiness. Sadly, before we get to see how an omnipotent being acts while blitzed, Cloak and Dagger comes in lights ablazing, but the Beyonder does not take kindly to them interrupting his needlepoint work. Actually, his biggest thing is that the drug dealers were just trying to make people happy, and disrupting that is bad, so by the morality of the world, Cloak and Dagger are the villains here. There's a whole discussion that could be made about that, so comment about it if you really want to give your 2 cents on that particular argument in the comments, obviously. What's more important, though, story-wise anyways, is that the Beyonder was binding them with each other's power, so Dagger now has enough darkness to negate her light power and ties back to being a stuttering mess. What's funny is that the Beyonder is literally surprised that this happened because he had no idea how their powers worked. They then try to defend that they attacked the drug dealers because drugs are bad, okay? The Beyonder decides that he will actually let the drugs take effect to see what happens to his mental state. This goes about as well as you expect when you have unlimited powers, now unbound to cognitive reason. But it does prove that Cloak and Dagger were actually in the right, so the Beyonder returns their powers, even though they don't want them back, but that's his gift. Then the Beyonder kills every drug dealer, pusher, runner, and user on the planet. Of course, anyone would go, but what about those who are addicted to cigarettes or caffeine or prescription pills? But that's not really covered here, so let's just stick with heroin addicts, since that's what he was shooting up with. But Cloak and Dagger are both against this mass extinction, with Dagger's tears making the Beyonder realize the dynamic of drug addiction, and Cloak and Dagger's relation to that. Cloak represents the despair and darkness of those on drugs, while Dagger is the light that may help them overcome their addiction. So he snaps his fingers and undoes his genocide. Does it actually count as genocide if he did snuff out millions of lives, if their only link was perhaps drug addiction? Leave that in the comments below. I'm actually curious as to what you people think. However, he left them as they were before he blinks them out of existence, letting Cloak and Dagger go back to their crusade before he departs. I actually really like this on the grounds of their characters, because they got to not just have a moment of explaining the reason drugs are bad, but they also explain why addicts need help, not just to be beaten up. But it is a tie-in issue, so this literally came towards the end of an arc in their main storyline that has these characters acting very differently than we see here. But this actually gives me hope as a reader that they can overcome the overly abusive Cloak and the overly conflicted Dagger direction to move back towards being the dark and the light, not just so dark. But sadly, I've gabbed on enough for this episode, so we must come to an end. As always, let me know what you think, if you've read these issues, or anything else that I've brought up in this video in the comments below. While you're down there, let me know what you'd like to see for the next Reader's History, Binging on Comics, or Then and Now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and please consider looking at our Patreon and donating. We just updated our goals and rewards to reflect the new direction of the channel, and who knows, you may like what we're gonna do to archive comics throughout time. Even just a share and a sub can go a long way to helping us. But more than anything, I'm the Comic Archivist, and stay golden, Inklings.